Have you ever considered leaving your relationship but have struggled to make that decision? Often, survivors of narcissistic abuse agonize over this decision. In this episode, Tara and I talk about the common reasons why this is so challenging for many people trapped in a toxic relationship. And the self-help tip is creating a budget to give you a practical picture of what it might take to actually make this step. Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse, where we talk about strategies, tips, and tricks on navigating and recovering from narcissistic abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health clinician with over 20 years experience and author of Love You More, a graphic inside look at my experience of a toxic relationship.
And I'm your other host, Tara Blair-Ball, certified relationship coach, abuse survivor, and author of Reclaim and Recover, Heal from Toxic Relationships with the 7-Step Guided Journal.
We're thrilled that you're here with us today. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and leave us a review and let us know what you think of the show.
So, Kerry, I often get messages, and I'm sure you do too, about what to do about leaving the relationship. A lot of people feel like they should, or they know that they should, or they've been told that they should, and that they still feel stuck and unable to take that step, that final step to leave the relationship. And often there's a lot of factors involved, of course, like there's children or there's financial abuse going on, so they're not financially able to leave. But I think it's more often than not, that I see that people really struggle with leaving because of something emotional or mental. Like they still have the hopes that maybe their partner will change. They feel very frightened about getting into dating or never finding a partner again. What do you see when you hear these comments?
Yeah, I see the same. I think also there's real terror, and I am not using that word lightly. There is real intense fear about leaving in many different directions. Yes, they fear their partner and fear the potential risk of harm to themselves. What's going to be the consequences, whether it's practical, tangible, or even psychological. But there's also terror about the end of the relationship that I think a lot of us have pinned so much of ourselves. We've tried to save this really damaged person in this toxic relationship. And so what does it say that we finally just say, this is enough and I'm done with this and I'm walking out? I see that. And I remember that I struggled back and forth probably more than a year. I mean, at least a minimal of a year in that spot, trying to figure out whether or not I should go or stay. And knowing that whatever decision I make would probably be final, that this person wasn't going to be forgiving, and that I'd have to live with the consequences of my choice. And that terrified me because I didn't know I'd gotten into a bad relationship. So now I don't even trust myself to make another decision because the first one was so horrible. How do I know that the second one's not horrible? And there's certainly not going to be takebacks on it. This is really common. I see people waffle on this for a very long time. And I know for those around them, it's exhausting and also mystifying. Yeah, and confusing. And people get really angry seeing people stuck at the spot. I know it's painful being in the spot, but I also know it's frustrating for those around them watching someone struggle in that spot.
Yeah. So the term I've often heard it described as relationship ambivalence. And I remember when I was in that particular space, a friend of mine actually recommended a good book called Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay by Mira Kirschenbaum. And I used that book probably 4 different times while I was in that relationship. The book has, I think it's 36 sort of diagnostic questions that you're supposed to go through. And it, depending on your answer, it will tell you if it would be better for you to leave or stay. And I remember one of the questions was, has there been more than one incidence of physical violence? And there had been in my relationship. And in that book, it says specifically, if there has been more than one incidence of physical abuse in your relationship, you should leave and you would be happier if you left. And I remember sort of ignoring that or brushing it off and focusing on other questions. I'm like, oh, we have a shared hobby, so that must mean better. And I was just using and trying to justify or minimize, even though this like said in black and white, if this has occurred in your relationship, you should leave. And it comes back to that place of just feeling so uncertain either way. I felt like if I stayed in the relationship, I would be miserable. And then if I left the relationship, I'd be miserable. And it seemed easier to stick with the misery that I knew versus the misery that I wasn't sure about or uncertain about, like leaving.
Yeah. I actually had a psychologist, and it was, I think shortly after this appointment that I stopped seeing her. I just couldn't see her anymore because I knew I couldn't take the action she was hinting at, and I didn't know where else we could go in therapy. It felt like I was cornered in the therapy too, but I remember I was sitting across from her at a desk, and there was a line of chairs against her back wall, and she swung her arm over and said, "It's as if you're asking him to move from that chair to come sit beside you. The problem is, Kerry, you can't get anyone to move. You can't ask him to cross the room if he's not interested in crossing the room." And I knew what she was saying, that I had expended enormous amount of energy in trying to get this person to change. And he was saying he was changing, but yet then the behaviors would indicate he wasn't changing. But I couldn't hear that because here's the thing that I knew that I faced. And I even struggled with this because I'd already been widowed. So I already had been thrown into this singlehood unwantedly. That wasn't a plan. I wasn't looking to be on my own. I had spent most of my teenage years incredibly isolated, incredibly alone. And it about psychologically put me under. It was so lonely. And then when I ended up being widowed, I lost my place in society. I was no longer a married woman with kids. I was a single woman, a widowed woman, a woman who had lost her husband in his early 50s. I was something nobody wanted to ever dream could happen. It happened to me. So I had this stigma attached to me, that which threw me back into this no man's land of being incredibly isolated again in a community that was very family-oriented, very couple-oriented, and I didn't have any single friends. So I already was like drowning in loneliness, and now you're going to ask me to leave what seemed to me like a lifeline, like real hope, and you're going to put me back out there again into that nothingness, that isolation, into that with no friends, no nothing. It felt almost, as weird as it is, despite how much abuse I was suffering, it felt, at least it was known. At least I at night was somebody held me. At least there was a conversationalist that I could have in-depth talks and discussions with. That was better than going up to nothing. And I knew that's what I faced. So I sat there for a really long time. But now that I look back, I mean, it is better. I have to say, a lot better. And yeah, I had to still grapple with that loneliness. That's true. That problem didn't go away. I had to face it and learn how to survive it. But I am so much stronger, healthier, happier, not being in that toxicity. And I think that's the hard thing, is that just like when we get sick, we don't realize how sick we are when we're really, really sick. We know it's bad, but we don't know how bad. And then when we get better, we look back like, wow, I was really not doing well. I feel like This is the same thing. You don't really know how bad things are when you're in the thick of it. You're just trying to cope and survive.
Yeah. I remember when I got out of that relationship, I really struggled sleeping in that relationship, like sleeping restfully, like waking up and feeling rested. I also really struggled with being constantly cold while I was in that relationship, and like constantly, to the point that, I mean, I stopped eating and drinking cold foods, cold beverages, because I thought that was the reason why I was like, my hands and feet were constantly freezing. And in the summer, even, I was having to wear like thick socks and things like that. And then I learned later that was probably just a result of the fact that I was constantly in fight or flight. And so my body was literally trying to conserve energy by neglecting my extremities. And like those kinds of things, like, and the fact that I slept well at night, even though I was alone in a little house that I had rented, like I slept well, even though I really should have slept worse. I'm here by myself. I'm a woman. I'm in a house by myself, and I slept better because I wasn't around somebody who frightened me. I wasn't sharing a space or
Yeah.
a bed with someone who frightened me. And really that was the big change for me. And I would not have been able to recognize that if I'd stayed in that relationship. I wouldn't have known what was all the good things that were out there for me if I had stayed.
Yeah, I think this period of my life is the first that I have allowed myself to expand, to really be myself. I don't think anywhere points along my life, even all the way back to childhood, my first marriage, and definitely that second marriage. I always was trying to keep everybody happy and not be triggering or upsetting or too much or whatever. And I feel like since then, this is the first I've been able to say, you know what? If somebody doesn't like me, this is not world ending. And I don't,
Mhm.
I mean, I kind of care, but I don't really kind of care. And that freedom to be able to kind of be in my skin is an amazing, amazing experience. But when I was in the thick of that abuse, I mean, the degree that I couldn't even hang my clothes right, Tara. I was getting lessons on how to hang clothes in the closet or how to do laundry. I remember one time he opened the refrigerator and said everything was a mess. There was no order to this. And I'm thinking, it's always looked like this. There's nothing different about today than there was a month ago. But he just was constantly picking at me to making me feel more and more broken and damaged and insecure. It was awful. I mean, if you even just ignore all the big stuff that was happening, just even that, just the degree that you're being eroded and worked away, it's almost like somebody's sort of literally taking sandpaper and rubbing you away. It's what it feels like, grinding you down.
I had a similar experience with my ex in that he would criticize my driving a lot, for example. I would get so anxious getting behind the wheel if he was in the passenger seat. And similar to first in cleaning too, he told me at one point that if I was his housekeeper, he would fire me. And little things like that really, to me, it ended up becoming just paralyzing anxiety. I remember being so anxious about hearing a criticism about how I cleaned that I just wouldn't clean. I would just sit there paralyzed by my anxiety. And those little things that I had felt confident about before, like who struggles cleaning a toilet? I mean, like, who struggles with that? But suddenly I was struggling with this really basic thing, and I didn't have any accidents in my car while he and I were together, yet he had two. Things like that where I'm like, so I'm the bad driver? But you have,
Wild that
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. It's wild that you say that, because this is what mine said.
The kind of driver you are is the kind that causes accidents.
That's what he said.
oh yeah.
Yeah, and I looked at her. What are you talking about? I have almost nearly never any accidents in my life. And the only accident I had was a sheriff hit me at a stoplight. A sheriff hit me. They rear-ended me. They didn't see the light, and they rear-ended me. But that's not my fault that happened. But yeah, likewise, he had two accidents while we were married too. So it's bizarre. But the degree of the paralysis, it's so profound. I mean, and then I find that when people reach out to me, they almost want to argue me down about why leaving is the wrong decision. I bet you've had that experience where they'll come to you and say something's really wrong, and then they'll act like almost like you're bad, or they'll play devil's advocate with you, and then begin to tell you all the reasons why they can't leave, why they can't afford to leave, why the person isn't that bad, or how hard this person's working, and yet they're the one that approached me saying something's off. But I remember that I put people in that bind too all the time. As much as I wanted the support, I was terrified of the consequence of the action. I lost relationships over it. Honestly, I lost several relationships, and they've never come back. I mean, I burned them right up because they couldn't tolerate the agony that I was in and the agony I put them in over my inability to make a decision. I wondered, what have you found that helps people through this? I'm kind of curious what works.
So my time of reckoning, I guess, the time where I was like really, really stuck and there was no balance between these two extremes. I was just constantly going between I need to leave, I need to stay, I need to leave, I need to stay. There was no like compromise or anything. It was just every day I woke up and felt differently. And when I was in that place, No one could tell me anything. They could tell me to stay, I would argue. They would tell me to leave, and I'd argue. Like, it didn't. I didn't know. I really, really didn't know. And mind you, at that time in my life, I made a lot of poor choices. Like, I immediately started having sex with him again after I found out that there was drugs in my house, and he lied about being a drug addict for 8 years. And hey, I got pregnant. I got pregnant. And that, of course, added all of the craziness to that. And it's funny because we had to do IVF to get our twins. I had never been able to get pregnant without fertility intervention, and suddenly I got pregnant. Like, so it seemed like this miracle. Like, oh, we're meant to stay together. I got pregnant. Then I miscarried. And after that first miscarriage, is when his behavior started to spiral even more out of control. He started spending crazily. And then shortly after that, he had seemed to get better. And lo and behold, I had sex with him again. Lo and behold, I found out that he embezzled from his job. And the day after he embezzled, I went to the divorce attorney to file for divorce because he had embezzled from his job. Like, it was illegal. And in my state, I would have also been held criminally liable for that. And the day he was served with divorce papers, I found out I was pregnant again. And in the state I live in, you cannot get divorced if you're pregnant. They make you wait until the baby is born to assess child support. So everything was on hold with the divorce, and I tried to work on things again, and nothing had changed. I mean, I was just trying to keep the baby. That's what it was. I thought the reason why I'd lost the first one was stress and how horrible that was. And I lost another one. I lost another baby. And it was shortly after I lost that one that I just had to leave. There was no alternative for me at that time.
Jeez, Tara, man, I'm just so sorry. I can relate. I mean, I would look for these like little signs of intervention, God intervening, or hope or whatever. I would look for that, and then I would attach magical level, like supernatural level of a meaning to them. I mean, here's one of them that I did, and now looking back, I kind of feel very uncomfortable. But when I met him and I had heard he'd been married 4 times, I mean, come on, I'm a psychologist. That's a huge red flag. And I remember as I walked in from that date thinking, I don't want to be wife number 5, and even flipped through my head about Henry VIII and his wives. And I just found the whole thing repugnant. And I sometimes hear God. I know it's weird, but I sometimes have these like audible experiences, and I heard this: who are you to judge? But who are you to say he's unclean, those that I have redeemed? That's what I heard. It was even said sort of like in King James, and I felt almost like pushed back by that, and I took that as a sign that then that was sort of a go-ahead, that he was a godly man, and he said he looked like he was. We went to church together. He said he was really working hard, but that tripped me up to think then whenever he would say he was working, even though there'd been another discovery of his abuse and betrayal, that I was to overlook that, because God would overlook that. There was forgiveness. And what I don't know what it meant. I mean, that's one of my big questions for heaven and for God. Like, what were you trying to say to me when it happened? There was a message there, but I don't understand it. But I attributed it that I should be long-suffering. And now that I'm looking back, I think, no. I don't believe that. I don't believe that a loving God would set somebody up to be tortured, to be broken and betrayed the way that this person did to me. So, but it's so easy to take like your pregnancy when you've had such a difficult time getting pregnant, or me really wanting to believe in the goodness of people and and I had just walked through a person dying. I stood by his side all the way to the very end. I kind of championed myself as a person who didn't quit. And then I was going to have to walk out on this relationship and say, yep, I'm done. You may get it together, but I'm not going to be here to see it. I'm done. I couldn't live with that. So that's another thing I think that makes it really hard. I see that over and over and over. I see people either say to me, I don't know if maybe they really are trying and I feel bad leaving. Who leaves a sick person? That's one big thing that people say to me. Another is, I have literally no money, nowhere to go, and no resources, and I'm trapped. That's another one that I hear really common. And then I also just hear, I don't want to hurt the kids. Who wants to break a family up? That's another big reason people struggle to leave. And I think the third one, but people usually don't say it out loud, is, and if I leave, then I'm alone. And what if I never get remarried again? I can't live with that. I think a lot of us think that. I was thinking that, but we usually don't say it out loud because it's not cool to say out loud. It's sort of socially unacceptable. But
let me come back to what I do with people in this place, because I think I got off track clearly.
Oh no, it's fine.
When I was in that place, no one, as I mentioned earlier, no one could tell me either way. Like, I really needed to come to that decision myself, because I knew for myself that if I had left too early, that I would have gone back. And when I finally did leave, I never went back. There was no question. There was no waffling. I just knew I was ready, and I left. And I find myself, I work with a lot of clients in this place, and that part of what I try to do and to be of service is to love them through it, to just say, I support you in whatever decision that you want to make. But I'm not going to pull punches. I am going to let you know that, like, that's not okay, or that's not super healthy, or is that what you want for yourself right now? I'm still going to ask those kind of questions. But it's, at the end of the day, it's up to the individual in that relationship. And I don't know what that's like to be in that relationship. And I think a lot of people love to insert themselves and say,
oh, if I was in that relationship, I would have done X, Y, Z.
Or if you are not in it right now, if you are not in it, experience it, you have no clue. I have been in that relationship, and I still don't have a clue what these people are going through. I'm not living it right now. I'm very grateful that I'm not, and I imagine you feel the same way too. Like, I'm so grateful that I'm not in that today, but I don't know what's best for anybody else. I can just provide guidance, support, and validation. And that's all that I can do. And that's what I do with friends that are in a similar situation. It's just support and validation. Like, what do you want to do? How can I help? And that's all that I needed at that time. And you're right, that was very upsetting to other people in my life who were like, why don't you just leave? Or you should stay. It's best for the kids, blah, blah, blah. Like, at the end of the day, like, I mean, they can judge me all they want, but that's not what I needed. I didn't need to be told what to do. I needed to figure it out for myself. And I learned a lot of lessons. I wish I hadn't, but
yeah, exactly. I think that's the biggest lesson, or I'm sorry, the biggest gift you can give somebody. I really do. I think that non-judgmental that non-judgmental acceptance is an amazing gift. And that's what I say to, when I was counseling couples, or even individuals, that's what I'd say. I say, I don't live your life. I'm not the one that's going to be at the end of the night, go to bed in with you. You're going to have to be facing what you're facing. And I can't speak to what you can tolerate and not tolerate, and what you want and not want. Because here's the other really bizarre thing. Even in our worst, even at the worst, I have never had a better conversationalist in that partner with a man than with him. Never, anywhere in my entire life have I had the more deeper, meaningful. Now, how much was real? I don't know, but it was meaningful. It was, I'm sure when it came to him divulging anything it had to do with himself, probably a lot of it was not real. But when it came to us talking about philosophical conversations about the meaning of life, that's what, to me, feeds me in a conversation. That's what I'm longing for. I have never found somebody as a better match as a man than him. I may never find that ever again. That to me was worth gold, worth so much to me, that I really thoroughly enjoyed that part of our relationship. But at the end of the day, is it enough? No, absolutely. I also wanted to be loved, and there wasn't love, and there wasn't respect. But that's what people don't understand. We don't understand these good places in these even at these really bad relationships. There probably are a few good places that they're holding on to and they're using as enough to survive on. Even though when you look at the big picture, most of us would say it's really not enough, but it may be to them. And we don't walk that. They walk it. And we need to support that. I think that's the hard thing for people, is to learn how to walk alongside of it and to tolerate our discomfort watching them suffer. But that's what it requires to really love someone as a friend or as a loved one.
It does. It does. And thinking too about that question of like, I can't afford it, my kids, blah, 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 etc. What was helpful for me and what has been helpful for some of my clients is really looking if you have evidence to support that. So I remember for myself, I was a teacher. And so I wasn't making buku bucks or anything like that. But before I made the decision to finally get divorced, I really looked at what are the financials, like what would it take for me to live on my own, care for my children on my own? What's going to be afforded to me child support wise in this particular state that we live in? What do I have to look forward as far as assets? And when I really looked at the hard data, I was going to be okay. Was I going to have to make sacrifices? Absolutely. I was going to have to make sacrifices, but I was going to be okay. The same thing with, am I going to be hurting my kids? I read a lot of research about effects of divorce on children, and everything that I read said that in 3 to 5 years is how long you should expect that children will be negatively impacted by divorce. And that, children are resilient, they can work through that. And what really matters is that you as the parent are the safe, secure person, that they can always rely on you. I couldn't rely on my ex to be that for them, but I could be. And I knew that I was going to be a happy, healthy parent. And I could only be that if I was out of that relationship. And having that data really made some of my decision feel easier, because I wasn't just making up vague excuses with no backing. I actually was looking at facts and being like, okay, this is what I could generally expect. And this is how to work through that. And that made it a little bit less frightening, because I could see that there was a way out for me if I chose it.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. In fact, I'd like to change up the self-help tip, because I think that's a great piggyback on what we should recommend to people. Because one of the things I have found is that we think we know and we make assumptions, but it's all just theoretical, and it's on wrong information or inaccurate information. So I would really love to suggest as a self-help tip that if somebody is in this position, actually devise a budget. What would it cost for you and your family, you and your kids or yourself, to either maybe find a place to live, or to find, even if you're by yourself, maybe a room to rent, but to literally figure out how much would it cost for you to survive on your own if you were to leave this relationship. And the other thing is to find out the laws in your area about what divorce looks like and what you're entitled to, because a lot of times things that are said as threats are often exaggerated, or it's based on media, like entertainment, like somehow the moviegoers know more about divorce than actually the attorneys in your area know. But I've found that the number of times that people have gotten wrong information and then built their whole assumption off of, I can't leave because of XYZ, and come to find out they're totally wrong about that.
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing, is that there are opportunities to learn more from professionals. Like a lot of women's resource centers or crisis centers or domestic violence shelters have free office hours with attorneys that can meet with you and provide information as far as like, what would it take to leave? Do I need to do a restraining order? What would that look like? How much would it cost? What could I expect as far as child support? And that can make things feel a little bit less frightening and less unknown.
Exactly. But find out what happens to your mortgage. So many times we assume, oh, I'll lose the house, or I can't afford the house, or we'll make some big decision based upon, well, maybe that's not how it works. You have no idea until you sit down and talk to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And make decisions based on what makes sense financially for you as an individual versus anything else. Like, I did not keep the house. We sold the house, and I would not have been able to be on good financial footing if we had not sold the house. We sold the house at a profit. I was able to pay off some debts that were just in my name, like my car loan and things like that. And it put me in a good place to be able to support myself and my kids with having a cushion, which I would not have been able to have. I've talked with several clients where they chose to keep the house and then weren't able to, and that put them in bad financial stead later. And so making decisions based on you and your kids and what's best for you and your kids. And sometimes that may mean moving to a different area or moving to somewhere smaller or not having the same lifestyle, but with the intention that you'd have it in the future. You'd be able to work towards that in the future versus, my kids didn't care that they were in a much smaller house. They really didn't. They just cared that I was there, that I was there with them and that I was playing with them. And that's what I had to focus on.
Exactly. I think that's so wise. I know that there's where I got trapped too, is I didn't have the most accurate information and it was coloring my decisions in the wrong direction. Definitely. So I think that's great advice.
Could you relate to Kerry and I's description of why we felt stuck in our toxic relationships? And what questions do you have about leaving that you might need to research? You can let us know by emailing us at hello@breakingfreewithkerrytara.com. If you haven't yet, make sure you follow or subscribe, write us a review, and if you know someone who would benefit from this episode, make sure to share it with them. If you're not following us on social media yet, you can follow me at tara.relationshipcoach and Kerry at Kerry McAvoy PhD. We will see you back here next Monday, where we'll be talking about if all relationships are hard and what exactly is a toxic relationship.